The candles were white this year. I had picked them up in early December and put the red ones back because Frank always said white looked cleaner on the table. Frank had been dead for 2 years by then. I was still buying candles he would have approved of. That is the kind of woman I had become. The dining room on Christmas Eve smelled like roasted turkey and pine from the wreath on the door, and the particular mix of children's shampoo and crayon that follows grandchildren into every room they enter. Josh and Emma had made place cards in school. Emma had decorated hers with a horse that had 6 legs, which is not correct, but is considerably more interesting. I had straightened the cards 3 times before dinner. The children had been excused to the living room. Their voices carried through the doorway. The turkey was the same recipe I had used for 31 years, the one that came from Frank's mother on a 3x5 index card, with a water stain in the corner from 1987. I made it every Christmas Eve. I was going to make it one last time. The 3 of us were at the table. Brittany set her fork down first. It was a deliberate movement fork placed parallel to the plate edge, the way a person sets something down when they have decided something and want you to notice the decision. She glanced once at Daniel. Daniel was looking at his plate. She told me the arrangement had become difficult. The children needed more space. I needed more support than they could provide. Then she said, "The best gift I could give this family was to disappear from their home and their lives. I want you to understand something." She did not raise her voice. There were no dramatic pauses for effect. She said it the way a person says something they have rehearsed to the point of believing it was always true. I did not look at Brittany. I looked at Daniel. He was still looking at his plate. The fork in his hand had gone still. He did not look up. 3 seconds. I counted them the way I used to count, seconds during a patient's pulse check, not mechanically, but with full attention, each number occupying the whole of me. He did not look up. I picked up my napkin. I folded it once, twice, set it beside my plate. I stood. I walked to the kitchen and collected my purse from the hook by the door, the hook I had installed myself in 1993, and my overnight bag from the corner where I had placed it that morning, and I put on my coat. I did not say anything. I opened the front door and closed it behind me. I need you to understand that too. I want you to know that I had been waiting 6 weeks for her to say those words. Not because I am cruel, because I needed her to say them on camera, in a room where her voice could not later be explained away, softened, or denied. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand how a 63-year-old woman who has made turkey from her mother-in-law's recipe for 31 years ended up here in a house that was hers, planning something she never wanted to have to plan, to protect something she should never have had to fight for. 6 weeks earlier, 35 years of hospital shifts recalibrate your internal clock. I was up at 5:20 on most mornings, standing in the kitchen in the dark before the house made any sound, making coffee. 4 cups. 1 for me, 1 for Daniel, 1 for Brittany, one that I set out each morning without quite naming who it was for. Some mornings I thought it was habit. Some mornings I thought it was hope. I have since stopped trying to distinguish between the two. I had lived in this house for 39 years. Frank and I bought it in 1985 when Daniel was 3 months old, and I was still on maternity leave, and we had exactly $4,000 in our savings account, and the kind of optimism that made $4,000 seem like enough. The kitchen was a galley then, narrow and dim. We knocked out the wall in 1999. We celebrated by hiring a contractor. We ate dinner standing over sawdust for 3 weeks and did not mind. I still chose where the coffee maker went. I still chose the cabinet pulls brushed nickel, in a style the hardware store called transitional, which I had always privately thought was a dignified way of saying it did not commit to anything. The rose bush outside the kitchen window was mine. I planted it in April of 1997, and it still bloomed every June in a shade of pink that was almost red and always surprised me. That October morning, Josh came down the stairs at 6:50 in his dinosaur pajamas, and I had his oatmeal ready. He sat on the stool at the counter and ate without looking up, already half asleep. He was 8 years old, and he still smelled the way he did as an infant. Emma came down at 7 and showed me a drawing she had made of a horse. It had 6 legs. I told her it was the most interesting horse I had ever seen, which was true. Caleb came down at 7:20 and immediately wanted to be picked up, so I picked him up. Brittany came down at 7:30. I had her coffee ready. She picked it up from the counter without looking up from her phone. I was the grandmother. I was useful. I was necessary. What I did not know then, what I would not know for another 3 weeks, was that Brittany had been adding something to my coffee every morning for months. That Saturday, Josh and I were doing a jigsaw puzzle on the living room floor. A lighthouse on a rocky coast, 1,000 pieces. He was working on the border pieces with the focused determination he brought to everything he did. I was separating the blues. He did not look up when he said it. He was fitting 2 pieces together with his thumbnail. Grandma, Mommy showed me pictures of where you're going to live. It has a pool. She said you'll be really happy there. I placed 1 piece into the border. Did she? Yeah. He finally got the 2 pieces to click together. She's been looking at it for a while. A while. I placed another piece. My hands were steady. The room did not change. Josh moved on to the next corner section without any awareness of what he had just set down in the room beside the puzzle. That is the thing about children. They give you the truth without knowing it is the truth. She had been looking at it for a while. I finished the puzzle border with Josh. I made lunch. I read to Caleb in the afternoon. I did not sleep that night until after 2. The morning it broke through was a Tuesday in late October. I had been noticing things for weeks and explaining them away for just as long. The fogginess in the late mornings, the 2 times I had called Caleb by Emma's name. The afternoon I fell asleep in the armchair and did not wake up until 5:30. I attributed it to poor sleep, to grief, to the particular exhaustion of holding yourself together in a house where you are always aware of taking up space. Then the Tuesday. I reached for the kitchen door handle on my way to the garage. My right hand closed around the knob. My fingers, the same fingers that had set IVs at 2 in the morning for 35 years, that had pressed gauze into wounds without shaking, that had done 10,000 small precise things in a row, did not respond with their usual force. The coffee cup I was holding hit the floor. I stood looking at the broken pieces. I know what fine motor failure means. Fine motor compromise in a 63-year-old woman, without hypertension, without arthritis, without any documented neurological history, is not what it should be. I swept up the pieces. I washed my hands. I ran through my symptoms with the dispassion I had learned to apply to things I did not want to be true. Cognitive dulling in the late mornings, word-finding difficulty, excessive daytime fatigue, disrupted fine motor function. These were not grief symptoms. They were not what age felt like. I called Dr. Wallace at 8:15 and told her, in the specific language that comes automatically after 35 years, I needed a targeted toxicology screen for sedative hypnotic compounds, specifically benzodiazepines and non-benzodiazepine sleep agents. I would explain when I arrived. The results came back 72 hours later. Dr. Wallace called my cell phone, not the house line. She asked me to come in. I sat across from her in the examination room, my legal pad on my knee, and I asked the questions I knew to ask. Detection window 8 to 14 days for standard panels, longer with this screening method. Consistent levels across the sample, not a single exposure, but a pattern of exposure over time. The compound, zolpidem, a sleeping medication. Nothing I had ever been prescribed. Nothing I had reason to have in my system. I wrote all of this down. My handwriting was neat. The pen did not shake. Dr. Wallace was looking at me with the careful expression that doctors develop for delivering information they cannot take back. I thanked her. I walked to the parking garage and sat in the driver's seat with my hands in my lap for 4 minutes. Then I called Ruth. She picked up on the second ring. Carol, you never call before noon on a weekday. I need to show you something, I said. And I need you not to say anything until I finish. Have you ever known something was wrong and told yourself it was not, because the alternative was something you were not ready to face? I had been doing that for months. I am a nurse. I am trained to recognize the signs. I recognized them, and I looked away, because looking directly at what they meant was going to cost something I was not sure I could afford. But I had a broken cup on my kitchen floor, and zolpidem in my bloodstream, and a grandson who had told me, with the complete innocence of a child who does not know what he is reporting, that his mother had been looking at the place they planned to send me for a while. I was ready to look directly at it now. Ruth Henderson has been my friend for 40 years. We met in the first week of nursing school. She was the only person in orientation who had brought a legal pad instead of a spiral notebook, and I thought that was either very impressive or deeply strange, and 40 years later, I still have not decided which. We have been eating at each other's kitchen tables ever since. Her house is small and warm and smells like old paper and coffee. She met me at the door before I had finished parking. She had already put the kettle on. I sat down. I told her everything, in order, the way I would have presented a patient's history on rounds, the fogginess, the word-finding difficulty, the broken cup, the call to Dr. Wallace, the results. Ruth did not say anything while I spoke. She did not make the sounds people make to indicate they are listening, the affirmations, the small sympathetic noises. She simply listened, which is the most useful thing a person can do and also the rarest. When I finished, she was quiet for 10 seconds. Before anything else, she said, I need you to show me the trust document. I had taken it from the filing cabinet before I left the house. Frank had always kept the estate documents in a green folder, alphabetized behind a divider labeled legal. Even now, 2 years after his death, I had not reorganized that drawer. Ruth read without speaking. She turned pages with the unhurried attention of someone who has read a great many documents and learned to distrust the ones that seem simple. She had a pencil in her hand. She always had a pencil, and I watched her mark something on the 3rd page without comment. Then she turned back to the marked passage and set the document flat on the table between us. She explained what she had found. Frank established the trust in 2018, a standard family instrument, nothing unusual, but he had called her office in October of 2020 to request a specific amendment, an addition to the existing terms. Ruth had the notes from that call in her office files. She had reviewed them that morning before I arrived, because when I had said on the phone that I needed to show her something, her instinct told her to pull everything she had on the Mitchell estate. The amendment added a life estate provision for me. I had the right to occupy the property for the duration of my life. No transfer of my interest could be executed without court approval. No modification of the life estate could be made without a judge reviewing its terms. Frank had made it, in legal language, nearly impossible to remove me from my own home. He called you himself, I said. Yes. Ruth found the page in her notes. He said, and I have this verbatim, he said. I want to make sure Carol always has a home, Ruth, no matter what happens with Daniel's marriage. The kitchen was very quiet. No matter what happens with Daniel's marriage. Frank had said those words from a hospital bed in October of 2024, months before he died. He had taken time in that condition to call his wife's oldest friend and make sure the house was protected. He had not told me he called. He had simply acted on the worry and left the protection in place, quietly, the way he did everything he believed in. He never told me he called you, I said. He didn't want to worry you. Ruth looked at me steadily. He knew you would have spent the next 4 months wondering if he was right to worry. He would have been correct about that. I sat with it for a moment. The document on the table between us. Frank's handwriting was not on it. It was a legal amendment, typed and notarized. But it carried him somehow, the way objects carry people long after the people are gone. He had thought about exactly this. He had thought about Brittany, or about the possibility of a Brittany, and he had done the one thing he could do from the position he was in. I had spent 2 years in that house, making myself smaller and quieter and more grateful, trying to earn the right to stay. Frank had already made certain I could stay, before I ever had to ask. Ruth let me have the silence for a full minute. Then she turned to the second thing she needed to tell me. Brittany had conducted research before beginning the document process. She had located the Mitchell Family Trust through a county records search and retrieved a copy of the 2018 version, the original, filed through a different administrative office than the 2020 amendment. The 2018 version did not contain the life estate provision. Based on that version, Brittany's plan had legal logic. If she could obtain both Carol's signature and Daniel's signature on a quitclaim deed, the transfer might have been executable. She had been working from the wrong version of the document, not because she was careless, but because the 2020 amendment was filed through Ruth's private estate practice, not through the county recorder's public index, and a standard record search would not have surfaced it. Brittany had done research. She simply did not know there was a second document to find. She had been thorough, and she had still missed the thing that made everything she planned impossible. Frank, as it turned out, had been more thorough. By the following morning, Ruth's paralegal had obtained the quitclaim deed Brittany had prepared through a title company using Carol's name. It was not filed. It had been drafted and was waiting for signatures Carol's, which Brittany believed she had already obtained from the form Carol signed on a foggy morning in September, and Daniel's, which Brittany had apparently secured separately, embedded in a different document whose full contents Carol could only now guess at. Even with both signatures, the deed would have been unenforceable. The 2020 amendment made it so. But Brittany had not known that, and she had moved forward as though she had already won, and that was a very specific kind of person, one who had never seriously considered the possibility of being wrong. I said, "What do I do?" Ruth said, "Nothing yet. You let her think it's working." Before I left Ruth's house that evening, I stopped at the door. "Ruth," I said, "what if she's not entirely wrong about some of it?" Ruth looked at me without speaking. "The children do need more space. Emma has been in the sunroom for 2 months. That room is barely large enough for a bed and a dresser. I take up a room that could easily be hers. And I am 63, and I am slower than I used to be. And there are mornings when I wonder if I am actually, Carol, more work than I am help. And maybe if I were in a place where, Carol," I stopped. "She drugged you," Ruth said. The kitchen was very quiet again. "Yes," I said. "She did." I drove home. I pulled into the driveway at 6:45 and sat in the car for a moment before going inside, the way I always did now, taking one breath between the outside world and the world of the house, the small ritual of preparing to be unobtrusive. I had been doing it so long I had stopped noticing I was doing it. I noticed, that evening, Daniel was waiting in the living room. Brittany had taken the children upstairs. The brochure was face down on the coffee table, which told me he had set it down at some point and then could not quite make himself pick it back up, and that small hesitation was the most honest thing he had done in weeks. He turned it over when I came in. The cover read, "Westerville Gardens, where the next chapter begins." A photograph of a white-haired woman in a cardigan, standing in a garden, engineered to appear spontaneous. I picked it up. I read the cover. I turned it over and read the back. I set it down. "Did Brittany find this place?" I said, "or did you?" He did not answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. "I'll think about it," I said. I went upstairs. I called Ruth from my room with the door closed, sitting on the edge of the bed in my coat, because I had not yet taken it off. I told her I was ready to begin. She said, "Are you certain?" Outside the window, the rosebush was bare. It had gone dormant 6 weeks ago. It did that every year, shed everything, pulled inward, waited. Every June it came back in that particular pink that was almost red, the same as the year before, the same as it had been since 1997. "Yes," I said, "I'm certain." 2 days after the nursing home brochure, I drove to Ruth's office on a Wednesday morning while Daniel was at work and Brittany was in a meeting and the children were at school. I told no one where I was going. I said I was running errands. This was technically true. Ruth had a list. Step 1. I was to stop drinking the coffee Brittany made. Starting immediately. Each morning, I would pour it down the bathroom sink in my room before coming downstairs. then make my own in the small coffee maker Ruth was going to send home with me that afternoon. Tucked at the back of my closet behind the winter sweaters, I was not to tell Daniel. Step 2. I was to sign nothing. Any document Brittany presented me, any form, any paper, anything with a line for my name, I was to photograph with my phone before touching it and send the image to Ruth. I was to say I needed time to think it over. Step 3. I was to appear exactly as Brittany believed I was. More forgetful than last month. Slightly slower. Appreciative of help I did not need. I was to accept it graciously, which is a different thing from gratefully gratitude implies. The help was genuine. Step 4 was the cameras. Ruth had a contact named Gary who asked no questions. 2 devices, small, unremarkable. One behind the spice rack on the kitchen shelf, angled to cover the counter and the stove. One inside the Vermont clock on the living room bookshelf, the one Daniel's father had brought back from a fishing trip in 1989. The clock ran. It would continue to run. It would also record. Ohio required one-party consent for recording, Ruth explained, in a space where the recording party had a legal right to be present. As life tenant of the Mitchell family trust property, I had legal standing in every room of that house. The cameras would capture video without audio, which was conservative Ohio law would have permitted audio as well, but Ruth said she preferred conservative. Conservative, she said, holds up better. Step 5. We waited for Brittany to speak openly. People who believe they are winning become careless in proportion to their certainty. The more thoroughly a person believes the outcome is decided, the less they invest in managing appearances. I drove home with a coffee maker in a paper bag, and a set of instructions I reviewed in the car before going inside, then folded and put in my coat pocket, then burned that evening in the outdoor fire pit. 35 years of nursing had prepared me, without my knowing it, for exactly this. Precise tasks in frightening conditions. Steady hands when the stakes are high. The professional habit of not showing what you know until it is useful to show it. I installed both cameras at 3 in the morning, when the house was fully dark and quiet. The spice rack took 4 minutes. The clock took 11, because I had to remove the back panel with a flathead screwdriver and work by the light of my phone screen, and I did not want to rush. When the panel was back in place, the clock looked exactly as it always had. I set it on the shelf and went to the bathroom to wash my hands. I was standing in the hallway when I heard it. Caleb's door was closed. Through it came the sound of a 4-year-old sleeping that specific, unconscious, entirely trusting rhythm of breath that belongs exclusively to small children and to people who have nothing they are hiding. He was completely asleep. He had no idea that anything in the world was wrong. I stood there for what was probably 2 minutes but felt both shorter and longer than that. I had spent 2 years in this house moving quietly, setting my things out of the way, apologizing for the space I occupied in the refrigerator and the bathroom and the conversation, buying white candles because Frank would have approved of white candles, as though approval were a form of presence, as though earning it from the dead were the same as not needing it from the living. Frank had never asked me to earn anything. In 40 years of marriage, in sickness and in health, and in the long middle years that are neither, he had never once suggested that my presence required justification. The amendment he filed in October of 2020 was not a legal document to him. It was a sentence he already believed. He simply wrote it down in a form that would hold up in court. I had been asking permission that he spent his last months making sure I would never need. I stood in the hallway outside Caleb's door and understood, for the first time with the full weight of understanding, that the house had always been mine, the life had always been mine. I had been waiting for approval that had already been given, from the only person whose approval I had ever actually wanted. I went back to my room. I closed the door. I was a different person than the one who had gotten up 3 hours earlier. The performance lasted 2 weeks, and I would be lying if I told you it was difficult. That is the uncomfortable part. It was not. I had spent the better part of 2 years practicing every element of it without meaning to, and what had once been reflexive anxiety presented itself when I needed it as a perfectly serviceable tool. I got confused about dates out loud, in the kitchen, in front of Brittany. I asked where my glasses were when I could see them on the counter 3 feet away. I let Brittany help me with things I was capable of managing alone, and I thanked her for it with the particular grateful vagueness of someone who has stopped noticing when they are being managed. Caleb fell asleep in my lap on a Saturday afternoon. I kept my arm around him and did not move for an hour and 15 minutes because he was sleeping, and because the weight of a 4-year-old in your lap is one of the few things in the world that is exactly as good as it seems. Emma showed me a drawing that week of a person riding a horse. The horse had, once again, 6 legs. The person was wearing a crown. I told her the person appeared to be a queen, and Emma said yes, the queen of the horse, which seemed correct. Josh came home from school with a book report on migration patterns in Arctic terns and read it to me at the kitchen table while I made dinner, and I pointed out 3 places where his sentences could be stronger, and he revised them with the seriousness of a boy who has decided it is worth the work. I was doing all of this for them, for the specific, irreplaceable fact of an 8-year-old reading his book report to me at the kitchen table, for a 4-year-old who ran cold in January, for a 6-year-old whose horses always had 6 legs. Brittany grew more relaxed. The signals read as intended. She began having phone conversations in the kitchen at full volume in the mornings when she believed I was napping, in the evenings when she believed I was watching television. She mentioned to someone named Chrissy that the situation at home was almost resolved. She mentioned that she had spoken with a realtor, not to list, but for a market assessment, just to have a number. She mentioned that Daniel was on board, that he trusted her, that she had been very patient, and it was almost over. The camera recorded all of it without comment. 3 weeks before Christmas, Brittany came to my room on a Sunday afternoon. She knocked, which she did not always do. She was carrying a manila folder, and she had arranged her expression into the particular warmth that she used when she wanted something, not false exactly, but composed, the way a person composes their face when they know someone is watching. She sat at the foot of my bed. She explained that she and Daniel had been working with an estate planner just to get everything organized, to make the paperwork cleaner for everyone going forward. There was one document that would help simplify things. It concerned the house. It was standard, she said, routine. She handed me the folder. I took it. I read it with the slow, slightly puzzled attention of someone working harder than usual to follow a document they did not entirely understand. I asked a clarifying question about a term on the second page. I used the word encumbrance, which I knew perfectly well, in a tone that suggested I did not quite. She explained it to me in simple, patient language. I nodded. I said I would need a few days to think about it. She said, of course. She said there was no rush, but sooner was better, and that Daniel had already signed his section. She smiled at me when she left. The moment the door closed, I photographed every page. I sent them to Ruth. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited. Ruth called back in 22 minutes. Same document. Daniel's signature was authentic. She had been shown a different paper, Ruth believed, with this page embedded in the middle, positioned, so the relevant content was unlikely to be seen unless a person was specifically looking for it. But the deed was still unenforceable. The 2020 amendment still held. Whatever Brittany had managed to obtain from Daniel, it was not enough and never would be. I put my phone down. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet. December 15th was a Monday. Brittany was in the kitchen at 10 in the morning, believing I was sleeping. I had been awake since 5:30. I was in my room, sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of coffee I had made myself, and I was reading. I want to be accurate about what the camera recorded. I did not watch it in real time. I reviewed the footage later, with Ruth, in her office on a Tuesday morning with the door closed. What it shows, what the kitchen camera shows, from its position behind the spice rack at the angle Gary had set it at, is Brittany standing at the counter with her phone to her ear, facing the window. Her posture is relaxed. Her voice is clear. She told the person she was speaking with, the person I had come to know as Chrissy, a name she said 7 times in the course of their conversation that I was barely keeping track of what day it was half the time, that the papers were almost ready, that once the transfer went through, I would be going to Westerville. She described Westerville in positive terms. She said the children needed their own space, and that she had been more than patient, and that Daniel understood now what needed to happen. She said Daniel trusted her more than he trusted his own instincts. She laughed at something Chrissy said. She refilled her coffee cup. She stood in the kitchen of the house I built with my husband, and she was entirely, completely at ease. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. December 18th. A Tuesday. I was in the garden with my hands in the soil around the base of the rosebush when Daniel came outside. He had not put on a coat. The temperature was 34 degrees. He came and stood beside me without speaking for a moment, his hands in his pockets looking at the yard. He said, "Mom, Westerville is a good place. I've been there twice. You'd have people your own age." The rosebush was bare and brown and entirely dormant. Frank and I had planted it the spring after we paid off the house, in April of 1997, the same week I made charge nurse. We dug the hole together on a Saturday morning, and I remember the smell of the soil very clearly, and the way Frank's hands looked covered in dirt, and how pleased with themselves we both were, as though we had done something original. I kept my hands on the root base. "Your father planted this with me in 1997, I said. "We had just paid off the house." "I know." I turned to look at him. He was looking at the yard, not at me. "Do you know why I have never asked you for a single thing?" I said. "Not once. Not in 36 years. He did not say anything. I used to tell myself it was because I did not need anything. I understand now that it was because I was afraid. I was afraid you would realize you had the power to say no. The yard was very still. A cardinal landed briefly in the maple across the fence and left again. "I'll think about Westerville," I said. I went inside. I went upstairs. I called Ruth from my room with the door closed. I said, "I'm ready." Ruth said, "Are you certain?" I looked out the bedroom window. The rosebush was dormant, pulled inward, bare. It did that every year. It had been doing it since 1997. Every June, it came back exactly as it had always been. Same roots, same color, same particular shade of pink that was almost red. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Inside the house, I could hear Brittany on the phone again, her voice carrying from the kitchen. She was humming something. She sounded like a woman who believed the difficult part was nearly over. She was not wrong about that. She had simply misunderstood which part was difficult and for whom. I was awake at 5:20, as usual. I made my coffee in the machine behind the sweaters, sitting on the edge of my bed with the door closed while the house was still dark, and I drank it slowly. That last morning it felt like closing a drawer that had been left open too long. At 6 o'clock, I opened my closet. The gift box was on the upper shelf, white with a gold ribbon, assembled over 3 weeks, in increments small enough that no one had noticed. I had used the good scissors, the ones in the sewing kit Frank had given me for our 25th anniversary, that I had never once used for sewing. I lifted the box down and set it on the bed and opened it one final time to verify the contents, the way I used to do a pre-op check. The envelope from Ruth was on top. 3 pages, certified copies of the trust amendment, cover letter, in plain language. Below it, the folded blanket blue and white yarn, needles still tucked into the last row, because I had decided not to remove them. And the USB drive, which I had reviewed with Ruth 2 days earlier in her office with the door locked, watching 3 minutes and 40 seconds of kitchen footage, and then 42 seconds of something I had not known was on there until I saw it. I had held that second piece of footage in my chest for 2 days and not shown anyone. I wrote the note by hand, slowly, at my desk. I sealed the box. I tied the ribbon the way my mother had taught me. At 8 o'clock I called Ruth. I said, "The rosebush needs water." She said, "Confirmed, 10:20 tomorrow morning." I went downstairs. The turkey went into the oven. I unwrapped the bird and patted it dry the way Frank's mother had written on the index card. "Pat dry, do not rinse." The card had a water stain in the corner from 1987. I had made this turkey for 31 years. I was going to make it one last time, and I was going to make it correctly. The house woke up over the next 2 hours. Caleb came downstairs and wanted to help, and I let him stand on the step stool and stir the cranberry sauce for 11 minutes. Emma came down and drew at the kitchen table. Josh helped me set the dining room table, carrying the good plates with the seriousness of someone who knows they are old. He spelled the place cards himself this time, without asking me to check. I straightened them twice after he left the room. I do not know why. Brittany came downstairs at 11 and said the table looked beautiful. I thanked her. She made herself coffee in the kitchen while I basted the turkey, and she was warm and present and perfectly pleasant, and I thought about the footage I had watched 2 days ago in Ruth's office, and the way she had stood at that same counter, entirely at ease, and I finished basting, and put the turkey back, and closed the oven door and said nothing. There is a particular skill that nursing develops, the ability to speak normally to someone about ordinary things while holding information that would change everything. Timing is a clinical consideration. There is a correct time for every truth. The children set out their shoes for Santa before dinner, a Columbus tradition Daniel had entirely invented, but which they had accepted completely. We ate at 5:30. The children were at the table for 22 minutes. Josh ate quickly, new chapter book waiting. Emma ate slowly and talked about what she planned to teach her horses once she had some. Caleb ate 3 bites of turkey and a roll and then fell asleep in his chair with his face resting on his folded hands. Daniel carried Caleb upstairs. He came back down and said the children could be excused, and they went to the living room, and the sound of their voices came through the doorway. Josh reading aloud to Emma, Emma interjecting commentary on the plot. The 3 of us were at the table. The candles were white, as they always were. Brittany set her fork down. The movement was deliberate, fork placed parallel to the plate edge, the same small announcement of decision she made when she had settled something and wanted the room to register it. She looked briefly at Daniel. Daniel looked at his plate. She said the arrangement had become difficult. The children needed space. She wanted me to understand. This was not personal. That she wanted me to be comfortable. That Westerville was a genuinely lovely community. That she had done her research. She said, "We don't need gifts this year, Carol. We just need you to sign the papers. That's what we want for Christmas." I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his plate, both hands flat on the table. He did not look up. Brittany said, "The best gift you could give this family is to disappear from our home and our lives." The dining room held still. She believed she was offering me a dignified framing for something that was going to happen regardless. I looked at Daniel. He did not look up. I sat with that for 3 seconds. I counted them the same way. I counted a pulse full attention, each number present in me completely. 1, 2, 3. He did not look up. I picked up my napkin. I folded it once along the longer edge, then once along the shorter, a small, precise rectangle, and I placed it to the left of my plate. I stood. I walked from the dining room to the kitchen without stopping. My purse was on the hook beside the back door, the hook I had installed in 1993 with a drill I borrowed from our neighbor and returned the same afternoon. My overnight bag was in the corner where I had put it that morning, a single carry-on, packed the night before with the efficient minimalism of someone who has worked double shifts and knows how little you actually need. I put on my coat. I did not say goodnight. I did not say goodbye. I did not say anything. I opened the back door, and I stepped into the December cold, and I closed it behind me. The sky was clear, 31 degrees, the kind of cold that does not sting so much as it clarifies, pressing cleanly against the face and the hands and the back of the neck. The driveway was dark. My car sat exactly where I had parked it that morning, which I had done deliberately and with full awareness that I was parking it there for the last time. I did not look back at the house. I want to be precise about this. I did not look back because I did not need to, not because I was angry, not because I was finished with what was inside it, but because I had already seen everything in that house that I needed to see. I had been looking at it for 39 years. I had it. What the camera in the Vermont clock recorded, in the 2 seconds after the back door closed, was Brittany's face. I reviewed the footage later, with Ruth, as I reviewed all of it. What is on that recording is not what I expected. I had expected satisfaction, the expression of someone who has just gotten what they wanted. That is not what the camera shows. What the camera shows is a woman looking at the door that just closed, and then looking at Daniel, and then looking back at the door. Her expression is difficult to name precisely, because it is the expression of someone who expected resistance and did not receive it, and who understands, possibly for the first time, that the absence of resistance is not the same thing as winning. She had anticipated a scene. She had prepared for a scene. She had not prepared for a woman who folded her napkin and left without a word. I drove to Ruth's house. The porch light was on when I turned onto her street. She leaves it on when she is expecting someone, which she had been doing since before I could drive. She opened the door before I reached the porch steps. She was wearing the blue cardigan she always wore when she worked from home, and she had the particular expression she used when she had already decided not to say the obvious thing. There was soup on the stove. Potato, with the heavy cream she added at the end, and which she had been telling me for 15 years she was going to stop putting in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table I had been sitting at for 40 years. Not the same physical table. She had replaced it in 2009. But the same position, the same window, the same particular quality of light from the lamp in the corner that made the room feel like a room you could breathe in. I said. He didn't say anything. Ruth said, I know. I held my coffee cup with both hands. It was warm, the kind of warmth that goes into the palms and moves through the hands and settles into something that is not quite comfort but is in the same direction. I need to know if he knew about the coffee, I said. Ruth had reviewed all the footage. She had done it carefully, the way she did everything. She said, the kitchen camera doesn't show him present during the times the coffee was prepared. Not once. Only her. I sat with that. I still love him, I said. He's my son. Ruth did not make any sound in response to this. She did not say, of course you do, or I know you do, or any of the things people say to fill the space around a statement that does not require filling. She simply let it exist in the room, which was the correct response, and which is one of the things I have loved about her for 40 years. Outside, it had begun to snow. Small flakes, unhurried. Christmas Eve snow, arriving exactly when it was supposed to. That night I slept in Ruth's guest room for the first time in 40 years of friendship. 3 quilts. A window facing east. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when there is no one in them watching to see how much space you take up. The last thing I thought before I fell asleep was this. I had not slept that way without something watching me from across the hall in 2 years. I went to sleep in under 4 minutes. I know because I was counting. I was awake at 5:20, as usual. Some things persist regardless of circumstance. Ruth's kitchen smelled like coffee and the particular cold of December. I made a full pot and sat at her kitchen table and watched the window. The snow from the night before had not accumulated, a 1/4 inch perhaps, enough to cover the grass but not the pavement, the kind of Christmas morning snow that exists primarily as a gesture. My phone had 7 missed calls from Daniel, 2 from a number I did not recognize, which I decided was likely the courier service, confirming the delivery window. I had given Ruth's office address as the originating point, not my cell phone. I did not call Daniel back yet. If you were sitting at that window, knowing what was about to arrive at your son's house, knowing what was on that USB drive, knowing everything you had spent 6 weeks assembling into a single white box with a gold ribbon, what would you be feeling? I want to ask you that, because I have turned it over many times, and I am still not certain of my own answer. It was not triumph. It was closer to grief with a door open at the far end. At 9:45 I called the courier to confirm. At 10:15 the box left Ruth's office. I refilled my coffee and went back to the window and waited. The Mitchell house on Christmas morning. Children awake since 6, presents opened, Wrapping paper gathered by 8:30. Josh reading in his room. Emma explaining something to her stuffed animals with considerable authority. Caleb carrying a small toy truck from room to room for reasons that were clear to him. Daniel had tried Carol's number 3 times since waking. He had done this in the bathroom, door locked, which was how he made phone calls he did not want Brittany to see him making. At 10:20 the doorbell rang. A courier in a grey jacket. A white box with a gold ribbon, addressed in Ruth's office assistant's handwriting, neutral, professional, no return address visible from the front. Addressed to both of them, to Daniel and Brittany Caldwell, from Carol Mitchell. To be opened together. Daniel brought it inside. He set it on the coffee table. The children were in the other room. He and Brittany sat across from each other with the box between them, and Daniel opened it. The first envelope contained 3 pages. Ruth's letterhead, plain language, no Latin, no legal vocabulary that required translation. The Mitchell Family Trust had been amended in October 2020 by the grantor, Francis Mitchell, to include a life estate provision for Carol Ann Mitchell. The provision was irrevocable upon Francis Mitchell's death. Any transfer of Carol Mitchell's life estate interest required court approval and a judicial determination of voluntariness. All documents prepared for Carol Mitchell's signature in the preceding months were legally void and unenforceable. One paragraph, near the bottom, described what Ohio statute classified as elder financial abuse, in the specific and plain terms that Ruth used when she wanted there to be no room for a different interpretation. Ruth had not filed anything. She wanted them to understand what she could file. The second item was the blanket, blue and white yarn, half-worked, the needles still tucked into the last completed row. Daniel lifted it out of the box and held it. Then he read the note. I wrote that note 5 times before I got it right. The version I sent said this: I made this for whichever grandchild needed it most. Caleb was born in January. He always runs cold. I thought a grandmother's hands were still worth something. I understand now what you thought my hands were worth. Daniel set the blanket down on the cushion beside him. He sat with it for a moment. Brittany had not spoken since the envelope. She was looking at the box. The third item was a USB drive. On it, a yellow post-it note in my handwriting. Play this alone, not in front of the children. Daniel took the drive and went to the bedroom. He inserted the drive into his laptop. He sat on the edge of the bed. The first file opened automatically. Kitchen camera, December 15th. Timestamp in the lower corner. Brittany at the counter, phone to her ear, window behind her. The footage had no audio, but the cover letter from Ruth had included the transcribed call content, and Daniel had read it. He knew what she was saying. He watched her hold her coffee cup. He watched her laugh. He watched her be entirely comfortable in the kitchen of his mother's house, speaking about his mother to someone named Chrissy, and he watched himself understand that this was not a recording of something unusual. This was what she sounded like when she was not being watched. The footage shifted. 6 mornings. Timestamps across a 3-month period. The same corner of the kitchen. The same angle. In the third clip, Brittany was facing the window, and she reached up to the cabinet above the sink, opened it, took something small from the back of the second shelf, and added it to the cup on the counter. The motion was practiced. She had done it before, and she would do it again, and she had never once appeared to consider the possibility that she was being observed. Daniel sat with his hands in his lap. Then the second file loaded. Same kitchen. A different morning. Timestamp. 8 weeks ago, a Tuesday. Daniel recognized the Tuesday because he remembered the shirt he had been wearing that morning, a grey Henley that Emma had spilled apple juice on at breakfast, which he had changed after she left for school. He watched himself walk into the kitchen. Brittany was at the counter with her back to the doorway. She was reaching up to the cabinet above the sink. He watched himself say something. He could not hear it. There was no audio, but he knew what he had said. He had said, "What's that?" She had turned partially, said something back. She had not stopped what she was doing. She had completed the motion, the small thing added to the cup on the counter, and then she had turned fully and answered him. Just her vitamins. He watched himself pause. 3 seconds. His body was facing the doorway. His head was turned toward Brittany. The camera had caught his face in 3/4 profile, enough to see that he was looking at the cup, then at Brittany, then at the doorway. 3 seconds. Then he watched himself leave the kitchen. He sat on the edge of his bed in his childhood home. The home his mother had walked out of the night before in her good coat, carrying nothing she had not chosen to take. And he watched himself leave the kitchen. He closed the laptop. He sat there for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which I know because I have thought about those 4 minutes many times, and I have asked him about them, and he told me that he counted them. When he came back to the living room, he was carrying the laptop. Brittany stood when she saw his face. He turned the screen toward her. She watched the kitchen footage. All of it. She watched the Tuesday morning. Neither of them spoke when it ended. The children were in the other room. Emma was still explaining things to her stuffed animals. Josh had come downstairs and was reading on the couch in the hallway. Caleb went past the living room doorway twice with his truck, absorbed in something only he understood. Daniel called me at 11:47. I answered on the 3rd ring. He did not begin with an apology. He began with, "Mum." I watched it. "I know. The Tuesday morning. I know." There was a long pause. The kind that happens when a person is trying to find the sentence that says what they actually mean, rather than the sentence that is easier to say. "I told myself it was vitamins," he said. I did not say anything. I saw her add something and I asked. And she said, "Vitamins and I." I wanted to believe her, and He stopped. I don't know if I actually believed her. I have thought about what to say at this point in a conversation many times in the preceding 6 weeks. I had expected anger when this moment came, or something like it. What I found instead, sitting in Ruth's kitchen with the snow on the ground outside and the phone warm against my ear, was something more complicated than anger and less simple than forgiveness. I said, "Your father used to say that the most dangerous thing in a family was not a liar. It was a peacekeeper who knew better and kept quiet anyway." Daniel was quiet. "I have been that person for 2 years," I said. "I think you have been that person for longer than you know how to admit right now." "Mom?" "I know, Daniel. I'm sorry. I don't have a word for how sorry I am." "You'll have to find one eventually," I said. "I'll wait." He said he was coming to Ruth's. I told him the roads were icy. He said he knew. What do you think forgiveness means when the person didn't intend all the harm they caused, but did choose, at least once, to look away? I have been sitting with that question for weeks, and I do not have a clean answer. I think the question is worth sitting with. I think the questions that do not have clean answers are usually the ones most worth sitting with. Daniel arrived at 1:15. He came alone. He sat in Ruth's living room and said what he needed to say, all of it, without abbreviation, with the particular painful honesty of someone who has decided that saying the comfortable version is no longer something they are willing to do. He said he had chosen not to look because looking was going to cost him something, and he had been, for the better part of 2 years, unwilling to pay it. He said, Dad would have asked. I said, "Your father also spent the last months of his life making sure that what happened last night couldn't undo what he spent his whole life building. He wasn't perfect. He just paid attention to what mattered." Daniel left at 3:30 with a house to go back to and a number of very difficult conversations ahead of him that would not be completed in an afternoon. I did not expect them to be. I had not asked for easy. I had asked for true. 3 days after Christmas, Brittany came to Ruth's door. She had not called first. She was wearing her winter coat, the long navy one she always wore, and she had Caleb with her because he had asked to come. He had asked 3 times, apparently, once each morning since Christmas, and on the 3rd morning she had put his coat on and driven him over. I opened the door. Caleb looked up at me. He said, "Grandma," and then he walked in, not with permission, not with ceremony, just with the confidence of someone who knows where they are going. He wrapped both arms around my knees and tipped his head back and looked up at me with his father's eyes. I picked him up. He put his head on my shoulder. He smelled like shampoo, and the particular warmth of a child who has been bundled into a coat against cold weather. I held him. Brittany stood in the doorway. I did not look at her immediately. I held Caleb, and I let him settle his weight against my shoulder, and I thought about a blue and white blanket, and the specific weight of January cold, and a 4-year-old who ran cold in winter. I thought about all the mornings I had made a coffee cup for someone I could not name yet. Then I looked at Brittany. She was watching me hold her son. I do not know exactly what she was thinking. What I know is what I saw. A woman watching her child lean into a person she had tried to remove from his life, understanding what that meant about what she had almost taken from him. We looked at each other for a moment over Caleb's head. That was the beginning. Not a resolution complete. Those take longer and require more from everyone than a single doorway moment. But it was a beginning, and I had learned by then to take them when they arrived. 6 weeks after Christmas, I was back in the house. Not because I was required to be, because I chose to. Because the Mitchell Family Trust said I could live there for as long as I lived, and I intended to hold that provision in exactly the way Frank intended when he called Ruth from a hospital bed in October of 2020 and asked her to make certain. Brittany was seeing a therapist on Tuesday afternoons. Daniel in counselling on his own and with her. The house was not fixed. It was in the early, careful work of becoming something more honest than it had been. Emma had a room. She had chosen yellow paint with Ruth's help, and the horse drawings were taped to the walls in a gallery arrangement that she had organised with considerable seriousness. The blanket was finished. I finished it in January, in the evenings, in my room with the door open, blue and white, folded now at the foot of Caleb's bed because he had asked for it. He still ran cold in January. The blanket was exactly the right weight. In the mornings I was up at 5:20. I made coffee in the kitchen, 4 cups, the way I always had, and I set them out before anyone else came downstairs. Not because I was afraid, not because I needed to earn anything, because I am a woman who makes coffee in the morning, and this is my kitchen, and the cups are mine to fill. The house is the same size it has always been. 39 years of the same walls, the same ceiling, the rosebush Frank and I planted in 1997 that will come back again this June, in that particular shade of pink that is almost red. Some doors close so quietly, you don't hear them until the room gets cold, and some things, the ones you thought were gone, are just waiting for you to finish them. Every room in this house is mine. It always was. I just needed a very long time, and a broken coffee cup, and a friend with a legal pad, and the particular foresight of a man who knew me well enough to protect something I had not yet learned to protect for myself. I think about Frank sometimes. In the mornings before the house wakes up, I think about him calling Ruth from a hospital bed and saying I want to make sure Carol always has a home. I think about the fact that he had 4 months of knowing he had done it and not telling me. 4 months of mornings of his own, watching me make coffee before anyone else was awake. He understood something about me that I was still in the process of understanding about myself. He was like that. He paid attention to what mattered.